Did you know that the Isu were indirectly responsible for the Templars getting their hands on an Apple of Eden all the way back in 1969? Sounds completely ridiculous when you first hear it, but it's true. And surprisingly, that's not even close to the craziest thing they've done. Over the years, the Isu have committed so many horrifying acts that most of us either forget about them or simply never paid attention in the first place. Honestly, they have so much dirt on them that it almost feels like they distracted us from it. Yeah, I think I got a little too real with that one. Anyway, I decided to dig up some of the most horrifying and terrifying things the Isu have ever done. And honestly, the deeper I dug, the more disturbed I became. So let's see if you'll be as shocked as I was when I first learned about them. Because trust me, I think most of you will be. This one didn't strike me as particularly terrifying at first, but once I dug into the details, my lord was I surprised. And the funny thing is that almost all of you already know about this, you just probably don't remember it. The Isu, as we know, were incredibly intelligent. I mean, they literally created humanity. And trust me, we'll get back to that part later because it's a terrifying topic on its own. When they learned about the coming catastrophe known in Assassin's Creed lore as the Great Solar Flare, they immediately began working on methods of salvation. Most people know the basic ones like the Eye and the Immortality Project, but there's one solution that genuinely shocked me. Introduced in Assassin's Creed 3, it was known as the Third Solution, one of the 6 methods designed to save the world. And the idea behind it gives us some very disturbing insight into how reality itself works within the Assassin's Creed universe. According to this theory, reality isn't as fixed as we think it is. In a strange way, it almost turns the assassin maxim "nothing is true" into a literal law of the universe. The Isu discovered that reality is shaped by collective belief. Now, that sounds confusing, so let me simplify it. Imagine reality as a giant voting system. If one person believes something, nothing happens. But if everyone believes something, then reality itself begins to adapt to that belief. Okay, maybe that wasn't the best explanation. But the point is that in the Assassin's Creed universe, collective consciousness can influence reality itself. And according to the Isu, this solution actually showed the most promise out of all 6 salvation methods, which naturally raises another question. If they were so confident in it, why didn't they just do it themselves? The answer is pretty simple. Population. Despite their technological superiority, the Isu numbered only in the thousands. Humans, on the other hand, numbered in the millions. And unlike the Isu, humans could be controlled through the pieces of Eden. So the Isu came up with a plan. And honestly, it's one of the most important and horrifying plans they've ever conceived. They wanted to hijack the consciousness of every human being on Earth and force a single thought into their minds. The solar flare isn't coming, we're safe. And if enough people believed it, reality itself might change. The catastrophe might never happen. But there was one problem. How do you influence millions of minds at the same time? The answer was the Apples of Eden. The Isu planned to launch huge numbers of apples into the orbit, creating a global network capable of affecting the entire human population. Think of it like a massive mind control bubble surrounding the planet. The project was approved and the apples were launched. Everything was moving forward until the math caught up with them. The process simply took too long. They were running out of time and there weren't enough months left before the catastrophe arrived. So the project was ultimately abandoned. And because of that, many of those pieces of Eden were never brought back to Earth. They remained in orbit long after the Great Solar Flare wiped out the entire Isu civilization. Now fast forward thousands of years. By the 1960s, the Templars had heavily infiltrated the United States government. Through various space programs, they learned that one of these apples had ended up on the moon, just sitting there waiting to be recovered. And according to the lore, this discovery helped fuel the race to the moon, eventually culminating in the Apollo 11 mission. Once recovered, the Templars used the Apple of Eden to further their own mind control research. And what's truly disturbing is that they intended to continue the exact same experiment the Isu had originally planned. Think about that. The Isu were willing to rewrite the thoughts of every human being on Earth just for a chance to survive. And by abandoning the project, they unintentionally handed future generations of Templars one of the most powerful tools imaginable. That's what makes this so terrifying. Not the technology or the solar flare, but the fact that both the Isu and the Templars arrived at the same conclusion. If you can control every mind on Earth, you can control reality itself. And honestly, the concept of consensus is something I wish that games explored more directly, because if handled properly, it has the potential to become one of the most fascinating and horrifying ideas in the entire series. This one right here, it will make you understand just how cruel the Isu really were. We all know that humans were created by the Isu, but how exactly did they do it? Did they simply grow us in a laboratory? Did they use their own DNA to create less powerful versions of themselves? Most of you probably know the basic answer, but I bet very few of you know the details, or just how many lives were destroyed in the process. During the height of their civilization, the Isu wanted to accelerate their projects. The problem was simple: there weren't enough of them. Their population was relatively small, and like any ruling civilization, they wanted others to do the work for them. So the question became, how do you create a workforce that never says no? That's where the other hominids come in. Although Assassin's Creed doesn't give us many details about them, we know that several early hominid species existed during this period. Species such as the Homo erectus and Homo antecessor, I guess I pronounced it right, were evolving naturally and living their lives without interfering with the Isu in any way. They had no knowledge of the civilization that watched them from above, and that made them perfect test subjects. Two prominent Isu scientists, namely Saklas and Phanes, saw potential in these primitive species and began abducting them for their experimentation. And when I say experimentation, I mean countless experiments. Generation after generation of genetic modification. The process was so extreme that it fundamentally changed how these beings functioned. The end result was the creation of two closely related but distinct species. The first were the Neanderthals, who were stronger, stockier, and better suited for physical labor, and the second were Homo sapiens, us. Humans were designed for more complex and specialized tasks. The Isu shaped humanity in their own image, granting intelligence while simultaneously limiting our potential. Most importantly, they suppressed humanity's ability to naturally perceive reality the way the Isu could. It was known as the Sixth Sense, what we know today as eagle vision. Neanderthals served primarily as laborers, but humans presented a new problem. We were intelligent, we could think, and that became a problem for them. So the Isu took additional measures. And this is the part most Assassin's Creed fans already know. Humanity was genetically engineered to obey. A special neurotransmitter allowed the pieces of Eden, particularly the apples, to influence and control human minds. With an apple in hand, the Isu could turn entire populations into obedient puppets. Unless an individual possessed unusually high concentrations of Isu DNA like Adam and Eve, they had little resistance against this control. As a fun fact, almost every human in Assassin's Creed lore possesses at least a small amount of Isu DNA, and according to Mary Reed, many people theoretically have the potential to awaken abilities related to eagle vision. But that's not even the most disturbing part. The truly horrifying part comes afterwards. Once the Isu had created their workforce and built the society they wanted, they largely abandoned the other hominid species they had experimented on. To them, these beings were not people and not even failed citizens, but closer to livestock, like wildlife. In many cases, they were reportedly used as biological resources and spare parts whenever necessary. And it also means they created racism. I think that was too much. But think about that for a second. The Isu didn't just create humanity, they reshaped entire species, discarded those that said no, and treated living beings as tools. But unlike humanity, their story didn't last forever. The Great Catastrophe eventually brought their civilization to its knees, and after their fall, the surviving hominid species gradually disappeared as well. Much like the real-world Neanderthals, they were eventually outcompeted and replaced until only Homo sapiens remained. Which means humanity inherited a world built on the suffering of species that never had a choice. And honestly, if Far Cry Primal had been reimagined as an Assassin's Creed spin-off exploring this era in detail, I genuinely think this could have been one of the most fascinating games Ubisoft ever made. Because the origin of humanity in Assassin's Creed isn't inspiring, it's horrifying. The Isu weren't done experimenting with humans yet. They even used to abduct them from their homes to test multiple chemical compounds on them. And one such experiment they conducted, which you probably already know about, turned them into literal monsters, and I'm referring to the Project Olympus. But you know what the shocking thing about it was? They literally experienced agonizing pain every single day. And here's how this experiment worked. Normally, a piece of Eden would just control your body and mind, rendering you helpless. But as you all know, or even if you don't, there are other apples of Eden that look similar to the normal ones but have completely different properties, such as the one seen in the Curse of the Pharaohs DLC in Origins. Now, the apples used in this project were designed by Aita in Atlantis not just to control humans but to rearrange their entire genetic structure. Yes, and this is the exact reason their bodies mutated to a completely different level, making them look like monsters rather than humans. Almost like a genetic virus or a proto-zombie virus. This means that literally all the mythical creatures we see throughout these games, and I like to believe to some extent even Fenrir from AC Valhalla, although we never got to see much of him later on, were victims of this technology. But the worst part isn't that they became monsters, the worst part is that they were still alive, still breathing, and very much self-aware. They knew that they were being controlled and they had no choice but to attack. They were basically the zombies of the Assassin's Creed universe, but on steroids. They knew what was happening, they knew what they wanted, but they simply couldn't do anything about it. Kind of like those dreams where you can see and understand everything around you, but no matter how hard you try, you cannot move. Let me know how many of you actually experienced that. The sad part is that they remain trapped like this for hundreds of thousands of years, eventually becoming the source of stories that we now interpret as myths. But just imagine for a second, you're inside a body that is your very own body, yet you cannot control it. You can see everything, you can feel everything, and you cannot do anything to stop it. That has to be one of the most inhumane punishments anyone could ever inflict on another living being. Thankfully, thanks to Cassandra, they were finally freed from their torment. And that's why we see their bodies collapse to the ground after we take the artifacts from them. It's creepy, it's terrifying, and honestly, it's horrifying. Even before Project Olympus happened, humans were already being treated horribly by the Isu. Thanks to the RPG games, which leaned heavily into this part of the series, we got a much clearer look at how they operated. If you read the logs in the Fate of Atlantis DLC, you will find that Isu used to capture humans whenever they wanted with practically no restrictions. And what did they do with them? Whatever they felt like. Sometimes they performed vivisections on them, sometimes they even used them for experiments, and sometimes they simply killed them afterwards. That's just how cruel they were. I mean, humans can be cruel too, but treating an entire species like disposable tissue paper and throwing them away after you've used them, that's a whole different level of messed up. If they needed to pass time, they'd capture humans. If they needed a test subject, they'd capture humans. If they wanted to conduct an experiment, they'd capture humans. Humans were basically the new answer to every problem they had. And it didn't stop there. If the Isu got wind of a human settlement growing and thriving on its own, they would often send forces to wipe it out of the map. Not because it posed an immediate threat, not because it had attacked them, just because they didn't like the competition. But the worst part, even after killing humans, they still wouldn't leave them alone. They would go back, recover the bodies, and extract every useful resource they could find so it could all be recycled and reused. At that point, just let them rest. You've already done enough. And honestly, you can get a pretty good idea of how terrible the Isu were from one simple fact. Even Poseidon, a high-ranking Isu and the ruler of Atlantis, looked at his own people and basically concluded that they were the problem. That's one of the reasons Atlantis ultimately had to fall. The corruption, the experiments, the abuse of power, it had all gone too far. Like, think about that. One of the most powerful Isu alive looked at his own civilization and thought, yeah, this needs to end. That's just how bad things had become. The Isu weren't just arrogant, they weren't just power hungry, they were genuinely cruel. They just wanted to see the humans suffer. And the irony is that even after being dead for thousands of years, many of them are still trying to control humanity and reclaim the position they once held. If that doesn't tell you how twisted they were, I don't know what will. The Isu were absolutely insane, but out of everything we talked about today, which one surprised you the most? Come on, there has to be at least one or two. If you ask me, it was the third method of salvation. The first time I learned about it, it completely blew my mind. But enough about that, how was the video? I tried something a little different from my usual format, so I genuinely hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, then make sure to let me know in the comments. I'll see you in the next one, and if you enjoyed the content and want to support the channel, make sure to subscribe. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next one. Till then, take care and goodbye.